Well, you know I stay
in the wilderness,
in the wilderness,
in the wilderness,
stay
in the wilderness,
in the wilderness, stay
in the wilderness,
in the
in the
wilderness
wilderness,
till I die.
in the wilderness,
Oh
in the
Lord,
wilderness,
stay
in the wilderness,
in the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness, in the wilderness,
in the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
stay
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in the
wilderness till
wilderness,
I
stay there
die.
till I
Lord, you know
die.
I'm
In the
on
wilderness,
in the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
moan
in the wilderness,
in the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
moan
in the wilderness,
in the
in the
wilderness
wilderness,
till I
in the
die.
wilderness,
Oh
in the
yes,
wilderness,
oh
in the
Lord,
wilderness, in the
wilderness.
wilderness,
Oh
in the
yes,
wilderness,
in the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
oh
in the wilderness,
in the
in the
wilderness
wilderness,
till I
well, then I
die.
stay
In the
in the
wilderness, in
wilderness,
the wilderness,
stay
in the
in the
wilderness, in
wilderness,
the wilderness,
stay
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness
the
till I
wilderness, in the
die. Oh
wilderness,
Lord,
in the wilderness,
stay
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness,
the wilderness,
stay
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
stay
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness
the
till I
wilderness,
die.
till I
Well, then I'm
die.
born
In the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness,
the wilderness,
mold
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness,
the wilderness,
mold
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness
the
till I
wilderness,
die.
in the
Oh
wilderness,
Lord,
in the wilderness, in the
mold in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness,
the wilderness,
mold
in the
in the
wilderness, in
wilderness,
the wilderness,
mold
in the
in the
wilderness, in
wilderness
the
till I
wilderness,
die.
till I
Well, yes, I
die.
preached
In the
in
wilderness,
the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
preached
Lord, in the
in
wilderness,
the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
preached
in the wilderness,
in the
in
wilderness
the
till I
wilderness, in
die.
the
Oh
wilderness,
yeah,
in the
then I
wilderness,
preached
in the wilderness,
in the
in
wilderness,
the wilderness,
preached
in the
in the
wilderness, in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
preached
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in the
wilderness till I
wilderness,
die.
till I
Well, then I
die.
sing
In the wilderness,
in the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
sing
Lord, in the
in
wilderness,
the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
sing
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness
the
till I
wilderness,
die.
in the
Oh
wilderness,
Lord, then I
Lord,
sing
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness,
the wilderness,
sing
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
sing
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness
the
till I
wilderness,
die.
till I
Yeah, I'm gonna
die.
stay
In the
in
wilderness,
the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
stay
Lord, in the
in
wilderness,
the
in the
wilderness,
wilderness,
stay
in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness
the
till I
wilderness,
die.
in the
Oh
wilderness,
Lord,
in the
then I
wilderness,
stay
Lord, in the
in
wilderness,
the
in
wilderness,
the wilderness,